The China in Africa podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Africa-China Reporting Project at Wits University in Johannesburg. The ACRP aims to improve the quality of reporting on Africa-China relations through reporting grants, workshops, and other opportunities for journalists. More information at africachinareporting.co.za and our dedicated training website at africachinatraining.com.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast, a proud member of the Sinica Network from SupChina. I'm Eric Olander, and as always, I'm joined by Cobus Van Staden, the senior China-Africa researcher at the South African Institute of International Affairs in Johannesburg, South Africa. A very good afternoon to you, Cobus.
Good afternoon.
Cobus, we are now exactly 1 week away from the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Ministerial Conference that will get underway next Sunday. They're kind of all gathering, but Monday the work begins in Dakar and it will run through Tuesday. There is a lot on the agenda. We've been going through this over the past few weeks and in our daily newsletter about what all the expectations are, what we're thinking they're going to cover. Of course, we don't have a lot of details. There's been no published agenda. We don't even know exactly who is going to be there. Who will be remote, who will be in person. We don't know what the Chinese delegation is going to look like. It probably will include Yang Jiechi, who is the top foreign policy advisor. He's already been to Africa once this year, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. We expect African foreign ministers, trade ministers, energy ministers to all go. So again, we don't have a lot of details, but we're doing a little bit of forecasting as to what is going to be on the agenda. And what we know for sure, because they have told us this, is that trade is going to be a very important topic. In particular, talking about trade in agricultural products, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has already acknowledged that some of the trade imbalances they would like to help correct. This is one of the things we've been seeing over the past 2 to 3 months, that there's been a rash of trade deals that have been announced to bring in more agricultural products from Africa into China, and there's been a loosening of market access into China. And there's going to be a lot more of that. Now, on this issue of trade, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, a couple weeks ago, did an interview with Bloomberg. And this is something very unusual because you don't see head of states speaking to international media about the Chinese and making very, very strong demands. And Museveni made it very clear what he wants to come out of Focac and also from the China-Africa trade relationship is more market access. Let's take a listen to his comments with Bloomberg on access to the Chinese market.
The only new thing now we should insist on is the issue of market access. For me, what I would ask from them is to allow our products to enter their market quota-free, tax-free. They are allowed a few, but many are not allowed. We like more. We like a broader spectrum of access to the market, without tax and without quantitative limit.
Okay, without tax, free access to the Chinese market. That's a big ask because at this point right now, there are quite a few restrictions on a number of products, particularly agricultural products. Right now, the China-Africa trade relationship is highly distorted and highly uneven. China maintains with most countries an enormous trade surplus. So you look at countries like Uganda, Kenya, Senegal, for example, importing north of $1 billion, exporting in the tens of millions back to China. So a lot of finished goods are coming into Africa, and at the same time, agricultural products that have much less value are going back out. Also, when we look at China-Africa trade, this year it's on track to hit around $200 billion, which will be better than last year's $187 billion. This, of course, makes China the number one trading partner for Africa on a country basis. Region to region, Europe is still the largest trading partner. So if we look at it based on Africa as a continent and Europe as a continent, Europe is by far the most important trading partner. But on a bilateral basis, China remains number one. Compare it, of course, to the United States. $32.5 billion was the amount of trade that it did with the United States last year. So clearly China almost 6-7 times as large as what the Americans are doing in terms of trade. But that trade is highly distorted. It's not spread evenly across the continent. Most of it is with about 10 countries, and those 10 countries export a lot of high-value raw materials like oil, mineral, and timber. So, Cobus, that is where we are on the trade front. What did you think of Museveni's call for free access to the China market and whether or not there's any merit to that?
It struck me that the timing was interesting, and I wondered whether it was essentially functioning as a kind of a trial balloon to direct discussions around Focac. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure from African countries for greater Chinese market access, kind of at Focac, and of course all of these agreements are negotiated beforehand. So it'll be, kind of once we see the announcements, it'll be very interesting to see whether they actually did achieve any more market access. There's also I think it probably makes sense to expect some, because we've seen moves on the Chinese side as well to try and kind of position certain provinces as hubs for African agricultural trade, and also for Chinese e-commerce platforms to also facilitate that trade. But kind of what I think is the big thing to look out for is whether this is going to be on a product by product basis, or whether there's any kind of like loosening that signals a greater kind of like block access for agricultural products from Africa.
Well, let's get two perspectives on this, one from Kenya, the other from China. Patrick Anam is a trade lawyer in Nairobi and also a trade policy analyst at Development Reimagined. Patrick, a very good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for Cobus.
It's wonderful to have you here, and we're thrilled to also have your Development Reimagined colleague, Yike Fu, who is also a research analyst and a policy analyst at Development Reimagined. She joins us on the line from beautiful Hangzhou, China. A very good afternoon to you, Yike.
Good afternoon, Eric and Cobus.
Well, welcome to you both. You guys have been very busy at Development Reimagined over the past few months, preparing a number of fascinating reports. There's two in particular that we'd like to talk about today. One is From China, Africa to Africa, China, a blueprint for a green and inclusive continent-wide Africa strategy towards China. And the other one is written by Patrick, and you did this with Development Reimagined CEO Hannah Ryder, an African assessment of needs, demands, and opportunities for Focac 2021 and beyond. Patrick, let's start with you on that report. Going into Focac, lay out some of the ideas of what you think are the needs, demands, and opportunities on the trade front between China and Africa going into Focac.
The report, as you've correctly mentioned, is reimagining the Focac going into 2021. And of course, having looked at the importance of China in Africa, and also the importance of Africa in China in terms of trade and the relationship, we did look at some of the gaps that has been bedeviling the relationship at ISWA, mostly which are, of course, lack of coordination on both sides, and then also no lack of data to track the Focac outcomes going forwards. And so those are some of the key aspects that informed what we recommended in the report, which is that as we go forward, we gave out the reasons which I've already mentioned, and then what we've recommended includes entrenched and beneficial technical assistance between African countries and China. We've also addressed the issue of trying to put in place a means of monitoring and evaluating this process between African countries and China. And so those are some of the things we recommend. We say that, look, this is a relationship that has been going on for 20 years. And for it to be really win-win, as the Focac has always been putting it, there needs to be deeper entrenchment of the commitments that have been given before. There needs to be a strategy to follow through on them. And also there's need to have an independent person, possibly from other multilateral bodies, be part of Focac negotiations. And then finally, we also mentioned the fact that there's need to institutionalize the arrangement in terms of, converting it into something of a treaty. We've given options. It could be a free trade agreement. It could be an expanded preferential arrangement between African countries and China. And so, in short, what we are recommending are things that can make the relationship going forward more effective, more easy to follow, and more easy to track in terms of commitments.
Yike, we frequently tend to look at Africa-China trade in isolation. I was wondering if you could perhaps put it in the context of Africa's trade relationships with other large powers, like, for example, the AGOA agreement with the United States. How is China's trade relationship with the African continent? How does it similar and different from something like AGOA?
I think this kind of comparison has mentioned in one of the papers I wrote with Saya. And we propose to have a AGOA-like a continental-wide preferential framework trade agreement between China and Africa. Like AGOA has become a cornerstone of the U.S. trade and investment policy engagement with Africa. It builds on the market access extended by the U.S. and expand these preferences in favor of Africa, providing duty-free and quota-free access for over 6,000 products. And for China, I think some duty-free agreement already exists. So, for example, in 2010, like China agreed to allow imports from least developed countries under a duty-free, quota-free scheme, and this scheme was renewed in 2015 and is estimated to cover 97% of the tariff lines. However, it has a limited impact so far because while 99% of all least developed countries import into China in 2011 was under the duty-free, quota-free scheme, and China has imported little beyond such commodities from Africa least developed countries. So, but we think under the Focac context, so China could do more because like this such a framework could promote and increase exports from Africa to China into specific sectors such as textile and agricultural or labor-intensive manufacturers, and also increase an opportunity for China investor and business in Africa. So I think such a framework could be a step up from just a trade. So it could also encourage a strong focus like on special economic zones with Chinese FDI in Africa countries with export potential, and also to attract more investments and also create more export-led jobs. And I think relative small countries can also benefit from a AGOA-like framework. Yeah, I think such a framework could be enable Africa's growing manufacturers industry to be protected and enable countries to impose more for their most favored nations tariffs to show certain internal markets against chips imports.
Okay, so Yike, let me just see if I understand what you're saying. So the idea that you're suggesting is that China can do more to make it more attractive for manufacturers to offshore their production to countries in Africa, correct?
Yeah, I think that's kind of one way that China can help.
But why would a company that manufactures textiles or at the low end of the manufacturing food chain, why would they go all the way to Africa to manufacture unless they're doing it for the local market in Africa, as opposed to coming here to Southeast Asia where most of them are coming? I never understood the logic of that.
I think manufacturers in Africa has a great potential.
For the African market or to sell back to China or to sell into the global market?
I think sell to the global market and also sell back to China and also among the Africa continent.
Okay, because again, I'm sorry, I'm gonna stick with this. Making T-shirts in Ethiopia to sell back into the China market, the cost of shipping alone, especially today, would wipe away all of the profit on a low-margin product like that. I guess my point here is, what kind of manufacturing are we talking about? Being very, very specific. I understand manufacturing for the African market, which is happening in rather large quantities. Auto manufacturing, light goods and whatnot, those are really starting to happen from the Chinese. But creating offshore manufacturing zones like we have here in Southeast Asia that then export back into China and around the world from Chinese manufacturers, I find that hard to believe that the Chinese would find that Africa to be an appealing destination for that.
I think so Chinese investment in manufacturing, like for example, through the special economic zones. So we already see that like Chinese investment, like the manufacturer has changed, like progress from just making like clothing or apparels to the auto parts. So I think investment in manufacturing could also like create some value added like concepts, because like so manufacturing we can hire local employees and to like increase their like local employment. And I think based on our assessment right now, we don't see kind of a lot of Chinese companies manufactured in Africa and imported back to China, but they can enjoy some trade preferential like laws. And because like Africa is quite close to Europe, so it can be a possible market to selling the products to Europe.
Yeah, but Europeans and Americans don't really like the idea of using Africa as a backdoor to avoid trade tariffs and to benefit from free trade agreements into the US and to Europe. That's politically potentially sensitive, I would imagine.
I don't want to say now that using African to manufacture and import to Europe is to enjoy their tariff fees, but I think it's more related to like the job creation in Africa and like in Africa countries.
Patrick, at the beginning, we talked about, or Yike mentioned the kind of the large number of products that enjoy kind of duty-free access to the Chinese market. At the same time, we also heard President Yoweri Museveni calling for greater access and tariff-free access to the Chinese market. Can you give us an idea of which African products are actually entering the Chinese market tariff-free at the moment, and where kind of are the lower-hanging fruit, where eliminating tariffs would actually increase trade?
Yes, so currently the China gave African LDCs a host of 97% tariff lines, and when you listen to President Museveni's speech or observation, he seems to talk about the issue of market access. So yes, his point is, whereas there are already the duty-free, quarter-free system that China has offered LDCs, which is fashioned alongside how AGOA is fashioned. These products are still facing a huge market access challenges. For instance, we are talking of SPS barriers when they are going into the Chinese market. So what it seems to say is that look, we need to move the conversation from just offering the tariff line to 97% of the products to access the Chinese market duty free, but also we need now to address what is affecting the supply side constraints, which are of course the market access problems, which the president seems to mention.
Patrick, Yike mentioned that thousands of products already have market access. Are they being used to the maximum potential there? Is that those 4,000 or 5,000 products that are now duty-free and accessible into the China market, is that being capitalized fully, or is there more that can be done there? And I keep coming back to this question of the avocados in Kenya. There was a lot of fanfare a couple of years ago about exporting avocados. In fact, your colleagues at Development Reimagined did this amazing graphic with a beautiful avocado and showed the potential of this high-value fruit and this high-value export to go to China, and if you spend any time going to Baker and Spice in China or any of the restaurants, people love guacamole and avocados. So the demand is endless in China. But yet, out of the 100 companies that applied to sell avocados to China, at last check, only one was able to do it because of the stringent requirements for health and safety. That is, they have to be frozen and they have to be flash frozen before they are sold. And that was a barrier to actually taking advantage of the market access. So my question is, you can provide all of the openings you want, but if they're not able to take advantage of it, what happens? So talk to us, Patrick, very quickly about market access is one part, but actually executing is the other part.
I think the problem here, and I think you're correct in what you mentioned, and I'm also aware that we produced before sort of the infographics avocado. So if we could use the issue of avocado, for instance, we are talking of let's say Kenya being allowed to export this product into China. But then now when the export destination country, which is China, now says we need it peeled, we need it frozen within to a certain degree, and we need it packaged in this kind of way. And now we are talking of farmers who are smallholder avocado growers who do not even have the normal cooling products to do everyday cooling. It becomes a challenge. So the biggest problem that is between that achieving the market, addressing market access and increasing use of the duty-free, quota-free scheme is actually lack of capacity on the farmer side, on the productivity side, and it has also to do with perhaps lack of coordination between the governments whose farmers are receiving the duty-free, quota-free scheme, and the farmers in terms of what policy interventions can you now entrench as a farmer or as a government to ensure your farmers access the market. Because I mean, if China says, okay, fine, you can bring avocados to China, but now these are the conditions, which by the way China I think is in most cases like any other country within its right, because these are SPSs which are governed by WTO SPS agreement. It's now, in my view, incumbent upon the country that is intending its farmers to trade to now go for further negotiations and or implement a trade facilitative policies or measures that can ensure that farmers access the finances and access the facilities to ensure these cold rooms or these processing implementations are available. That, in my view, has not been happening, and I think it's one of the biggest obstacles into poorer LDC countries, as it were, accessing a larger market such as China, much as the duty-free, quota-free scheme is there.
Yike, do you see most of African countries still trying to negotiate these deals with China bilaterally, or are regional economic communities and other more larger bodies, like larger even on the continental level, are they starting to become more effective in terms of these negotiations?
So I think right now, we only see Mauritius is the only Africa country that have a free trade agreement with China. So right now, it's still a lot of uncertainty here that whether a regional bloc or a continental-wide free trade agreement will happen. So in paper, I also talk about some regional bloc or maybe has started some negotiation with China on free trade agreement, but like the progress is quite slow and even no updates. And for the continental-wide, so the AFCFTA, like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, is just operational on January this year. So I think it's still a lot of uncertainty at this moment to see whether there's a continental-wide free trade agreement between AFCFTA and China. But I think maybe in the future this might be happened. But I think definitely, from my perspective, a bilateral trade agreements from each countries proposed by African countries with China should be more common at the current phase.
Patrick, we're talking about free trade agreements. Museveni was very clear in his language where he talked about market access for African goods. A free trade agreement, like what China has with Mauritius, as Yike pointed out, is potentially very dangerous for Africa. Because trade goes both ways, right? Already, African producers are complaining about competing against low-cost Chinese goods. Imagine if there's no duties whatsoever. Number one, that'll be a hit on revenue for national governments that do collect a lot of tariffs for their national treasuries. Number two, China has the capability, more than any other country in the world, to flood a market with low-cost goods to displace local producers. Do you think free trade agreements between, say, the AFCFTA and China would make sense in Africa's interest in the long term?
Of course, I agree with you, firstly, on the point of the dangers that amount when you enter into such an arrangement, especially given the nature of African countries' productivity capacities, the goods they intend to export vis-a-vis what China is offering. So I think in the long run, what is more beneficial is an extended preferential trade agreement between China and African countries. And like Hika has correctly pointed out, what we have right now is which can give us like a sneak preview of how such an arrangement would be is what is between China and Mauritius, the FTA. Now the dangers of an FTA, of course, is it becomes reciprocal, so that African countries open them entirely, and then China also opens its markets entirely. Now, the tricky bit about it is the fact that, yes, both sides shall have opened, but now the capacities of African countries to match up the competitive advantages that Chinese manufacturers and products have is at this moment, I think, in an insurmountable task. It's such a huge task to accomplish, and I think in the long run, there's need perhaps for African countries to look more into going into arrangement after there has been a proper addressing of let's say infrastructure, connecting different countries, addressing of the issue of government subsidies, policies which are in place, which currently are not there. And so opening it up right now will be a very risky imbalance that African countries may be walking into.
Patrick, following up on that, we've seen one of the issues around the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is the need to harmonize tariffs across all of these different countries, and then also to eliminate a lot of them. How much progress have you seen on this kind of harmonization of tariffs but between different African countries? Or are we still seeing a situation where there's essentially where importers and exporters have to deal with many different tariffs across the continent?
That's a good question. There's still a lot that's yet to be ironed out in terms of tariffs harmonization, much as we are told that trade began on the 1st of January this year. And so when a normal trader crosses different regions, they are still likely to different duties. And because also, whereas African countries have variously signed the agreement, and most of them have ratified it, we still have some thinking of protectionism that's emanating in some countries. So I think the harmonization of tariffs is a discussion that's still it's still yet to be completed fully on the continent, and it's affecting not only the implementation of the agreement or the easy operationalization of the FTA, but also it militates against the bilateral, the intra-African trade of goods. And so I think it's a challenge that African countries are collectively now trying to address, but they still face it. And also, while at it and talking of, again, the question Eric pointed out, we realize that the AFCFTA as it is, it gives under what it calls continental preferences. It gives African countries, or any country with a signatory to it, basically the leeway to enter into other agreements with third parties. Third parties here being non-AFCFTA members like China, US, and etc. And I think that's also going to bring another layer of sort of confusion in the tariffs in terms of what preferences are we looking at, and what preferences will we be extending to other African countries after we sign those agreements, which have, let's say, better preferences with, let's say, China or the US or any other country. So I think that's where we are, but it's a big challenge, I agree.
Yike, let's step back a little bit from the details of trade agreements and free trade and even what's going to happen at Focac next week, and try and put China's trade with Africa in the broader context. I'm looking at the numbers right now for so far this year. And let's remember, China is far and away the largest trading country in the world. From January through October, just the first 10 months of the year, China's done $4.89 trillion. That's up 32% compared to the same period last year, according to data from the General Administration of Customs. This year, again, China-Africa trade is on track to exceed last year's $187 billion, which was impressive, by the way. That was a very solid number. It's on track right now to be probably, again, over $200 billion. But $200 billion out of $4.89 trillion, and this year it'll probably exceed $5 trillion, is a tiny amount. In fact, when you look at China's trading relationships with all different regions around the world, Africa is second to the last compared to Oceania, which is those little tiny islands in the South Pacific. When you compare against what China does with trade with South America, $300 billion. With the Persian Gulf, $225 billion. With Germany alone, it was $250 billion. The United States, $500 billion. Europe, $500 or $600 billion. And here in Southeast Asia, $1.2 trillion so far this year. So Africa's $200 billion is big for Africa, especially for those 10 countries, but really a rounding error out of $5 trillion for China. Help us understand how Africa trade, what's the point of Africa trade for China, given the scope and scale of China's really huge trade portfolio?
If you just looking at the data, I have to admit that the trade flows from Africa is quite low. So just given a very practical example just in my real life. So when I go to supermarket to shop, so you might see some of the wines from South Africa, but more like shelves, it was packed with wines from France or Europe. But I think it's more important to understand what the low means. So China, just you mentioned at the very beginning, so has been Africa's largest bilateral trading partner since 2008. And I think U.S. import less Africa products. So I think it's more important to compare with China and other development partners such as U.S., UK, or France, instead of just looking at like the specific number that China has trade with Africa with other regions. If you look at the data, we can also notice that Africa's export to China and has been like increasing since 2000. So I think that the main point I want to make is, so it's just like we can understand Chinese roles compared with UK or US roles in like trade relations with Africa. But I think if you look at this comparison, I think China really stands out.
Patrick, we recently saw these calls coming from the DRC President Felix Tshisekedi that all DRC minerals, and of course the DRC is a very big exporter of raw minerals, should be refined within the DRC. And we've seen many similar calls from many African stakeholders. It's kind of a holy grail in African development discussions that Africa should refine minerals, like on the continent rather than exporting them raw. How much chance do you see for that kind of demand or that aspiration being met by China? At the moment we're seeing a lot of mineral refining capacity is actually located in China at the moment, and that feeds into the logic of exporting so much raw mineral ore to China. So do you foresee any kind of movement at the upcoming Focac or later for China to actually play ball in terms of moving some of that capacity to the African continent?
Yeah, it's true. And I think DRC president has been very clear on that. And we also know that most of the minerals that are exported from Africa to the rest of the world and mostly in China is raw. I think what I foresee and part of the research that we've been trying to put out at the Development Reimagined is the fact that when you look at the 2018 Focac, there were 8 major initiatives that China came up with, and I think one of them was industrial promotion, trade facilitation, as well as infrastructure connectivity. And so I think that one, it needs to, these commitments, these initiatives need to link into sort of part of what African countries would want, what AU would want, for instance. And when you look at the report which you shared, which we put out recently, is that we try to link the AU continental frameworks, which includes the Africa Mining Vision, with the continental frameworks, with the Sustainable Development Goals, and also with these Focac major initiatives. So I think the ability of African countries through DRC and other mineral producing countries to move this conversation from sort of just exporting raw materials in terms of minerals to value addition is the fact that the upcoming Focac needs to perhaps revisit those conversations, and in line with the fact that China intends to, or as committed before, that they intend to help African countries accelerate the industrial development. I mean, these are some of the issues that I think African leaders, DRC can of course be a leader in this conversation to discuss with the Chinese side in terms of what is the nature of the industries or investments or FDI can China bring into the mineral aspect in Africa, for instance. And I think that has been lacking before. I hope it is part of a conversation that can be happening this coming Focac, because again, minerals they're huge in terms of the value, but they can be huger when value is added. And I think it is very central towards the conversation around reducing the trade deficit between China and Africa, when some of these minerals are processed locally before the finished products are now exported. Because again, some of the products, minerals coming from DRC are of course very critical in terms of even the energy products and these batteries. And with this debate of sustainable goods and environmental goods, I think African countries, DRC, etc., have this power in their hand to negotiate strategically in terms of letting China bring a production capacity on the continent.
Well, let's close our discussion looking at Focac next week. We want to get your expert insights on what we should be looking for in the trade front. I'd like to get a prediction or some kind of forecast from you as to what people should be looking for regarding China-Africa trade. Yike, let's start with you, and then Patrick, I'll come to you.
I think definitely to see whether there's any update policy agreement between China and Africa has made, or maybe if China have some commitments that to make to just encourage some certain products from Africa that can help Africans to improve the certain sector, for example, agricultural or manufacturing sector.
Okay, Patrick, what is your forecast for Focac next week on the trade front?
I foresee a discussion around debt, because it's been a thorn in the flesh for some time now, and I think the conversations we've had before with ambassadors point more towards addressing the aspect of monitoring and evaluation of Focac's declarations and negotiations beyond just the meeting. So I think that's one of the points that may be discussed. I also believe there'll be a discussion around green energy, green technology, green goods, including water Eric Cobus has raised. And finally, I also see more discussions, especially from the African side, in terms of capacity building issues, so that Africa can be able to cut down on the trade deficit that's already predominant between the partners.
Okay, we will follow up with you afterwards. Thank you both for your fascinating insights and for the great work you've done with the Development Reimagined team on these reports. I'm going to put links to both of the reports in the show notes. Report number 1 is From China Africa to Africa China, a blueprint for a green and inclusive continent-wide Africa strategy towards China. The second report, that was written by Patrick and Hannah Ryder, an African assessment of needs, demands, and opportunities for Focac 2021 and beyond. Both reports are just chock full of great charts and data and insights. And if you are doing research on this, if you are following China-Africa relations, this is a must read. Patrick Anam is a trade lawyer in Nairobi and also a trade policy analyst for Development Reimagined. And Yike Fu joins us from Hangzhou, where she is a research and policy analyst at Development Reimagined. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. I will put links to all of the Development Reimagined social media channels as well, so you can follow them. Patrick, Yike, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Cobus.
Thank you.
And Eric, I'd just like to add that beyond those two reports, Yike and her colleague Ovigwe Ego co-authored two amazing reports for SIA about the linking of the African Continental Free Trade Area with the Belt and Road Initiative. So those we'll post those links as well to two linked reports on how to connect the BRI and the AFCFTA. So we'll put those in the show notes as well.
Cobus, the team at Development Reimagined, Patrick, Hannah, Ovigwe Egu, who's our old friend, he's done some writing for us over the years, and Yike have been they must have calluses on their fingers from all the writing they've been doing. These reports are absolutely fantastic. And I regret the fact that we didn't talk about the last report you mentioned regarding BRI and AFCFTA, because the linking of those two is absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So that's going to be a topic for a future discussion. I've gotten a couple emails from folks saying they want to talk about that and they want to learn what people are thinking in terms of how to integrate the Belt and Road and AFCFTA, but that will be for a future discussion. My problem with everything we've been talking about today is, number one, I'm a little bit burned out on summits. I think both of us are, because I mentioned this in our show last week as well, that Africa's been getting shafted at all the summits. Right? I mean, the G20 summit, when it needed a conversation on debt relief, nobody talked about debt relief. At COP26, when they needed action and they needed commitments, hard commitments from the global north, the main polluters, to channel those funds back into the global south and to help companies like Eskom to make the transition from coal to renewable, nothing came.
Well, to be fair, like South Africa did get a chunk of money from global north countries for that transition.
But is it enough?
Well, what is enough, I guess?
Well, enough is to actually do it, because again, and we've had the IMF SDRs that there was a big commitment about how the rich countries were going to allocate their SDRs, their special drawing rights, to poor countries. That still hasn't happened in any meaningful way. And it's just over and over again. And I guess my problem with what we're seeing out of Focac is that everything going in is asking for the benevolence of China to do this. And this goes to the question of, does Africa actually have power in this relationship? But it's asking China for more market access. It's asking China for free trade privileges. It's asking China to do more capacity building. And we're in that same dynamic in many ways as we were in previous eras in Africa's relationship with the outside world, right? Am I misreading this?
I share with you this kind of I think we're both a little bit dispirited. I think no actual rational person's optimism could survive COP26. It's just too soul crushing. But beyond that, I share with you the kind of hesitation about the positioning of Africa within this, and also the language of. If China should help with this, China should help to boost industrialization, for example. China should help to open and boost trade. I get a little worried with that kind of language because it does position Africa in such a weak position. At the same time, I think, kind of what also worries me about all of this is that what we're seeing on the, kind of actually in the continent is a lot of national politicians not playing ball on the regional and continental level, So that is the kind of the hidden story that is frequently, I think, not told, is how kind of cooperation is undermined among African countries, and I don't think we're seeing enough kind of preparation for any kind of any kind of tougher kind of negotiation position coming from African countries, because of course Africa holds a lot of cards, right? Kind of like this as you said, like a lot of the minerals that China gets from Africa, it can get from other parts of the Belt and Road, but that's not true for all minerals, and it's not true necessarily for the bulk and the scale and the type of minerals that they might be able to get, particularly around minerals like cobalt in the DRC. But we're not seeing the kind of putting the pieces together to actually negotiate a tough deal with big cobalt buyers like China, and to also play them off against the big cobalt buyers everywhere else who are all desperately trying to get cobalt resources.
You can't do that, though, because it's Chinese companies like CNMC, like China Moly, and Zijin that own the mines.
That's the one problem. The other problem is that we're not seeing a unified continental position on, for example, forcing refinement on the continent. If these countries were working together more organically and closer, and they were actually on the same page on these issues, they would be able to force some kind of concessions. But at the moment, I don't really see that, although, who knows? There might be some stuff happening behind the scenes in preparation for Focac.
So this is the point that I brought up earlier, that economically speaking and on a trade basis, Africa is not important to China. And I don't mean this in any disparaging or negative way. It's just the facts. When you line up the amount of trade that comes out of Africa and the amount of trade that China does with every other region in the world, it's not even comparable. And then within Africa, most of that trade is with 10 countries. Okay, so another 40 countries do very little healthy trade with China. Most of them import a ton of stuff and sell very little back. Okay, so this is not a healthy trading relationship. But in terms of whether what you're talking about, in terms of exacting all of the leverage that African countries have, it's not in the economic space. I mean, you can pull together the ECOWAS countries, and they're still not going to amount to much to have leverage over China, given the economic imbalance between the two and the asymmetry between the two. Where African countries have leverage is on the political side. That is where they have the leverage. You want that guy to run, this UN agency? Well, you know what? It's going to cost you. We'll put our votes there, but you're going to have to pay up in other ways. I don't see African countries doing that. What I see is African ambassadors in Beijing, one after another, just basically carrying the water for the Chinese on any of the contentious issues where they would have leverage. Where sensitive votes at the UN, which could go either way, and if African countries actually leverage their agency and said, you know what, our vote, not sure what we think about this. I'm not saying sell the vote. I'm saying use your political power to its maximum benefit for your own national interest.
I think that's one field of leverage. Another one is the importance, or the growing importance, of Africa as a kind of continental tech customer to Chinese companies, particularly as these same companies are facing really tough pressures in their traditional markets in other parts in the global north. But also there, we recently spoke with Jonathan Hillman about the influence of China in the global tech sector, and also particularly the growth of Chinese companies like Huawei, how they managed to get so big and so powerful. And one of the things that struck me, I was reading the book, is that even though the way that these companies managed to become so powerful is now seen particularly in the US as kind of examples of China kind of playing dirty, like not following the rules and so on, and it's frequently kind of used against China and kind of as a form of criticism. Like, I think that kind of hardball, like forcing technology change, like for technology transfer, I mean, forcing these foreign companies to sign over IP, like, kind of forcing them to produce in, kind of within the, kind of your country, that's kind of leverage. That is Africa's holy grail. That is what all African leaders would like dream about. And to be able to kind of unite the, again, a 1.2 billion market, around those kind of tough, controls. But they're so, I don't think anyone except China can really pull it off, but particularly not Africa, because they're so incredibly divided between themselves.
Let me just read a tweet that came from Joshua Meservey, who is the Africa and Middle East policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, the Conservative Heritage Foundation in the United States. And I think it speaks to this question of the potential leverage that African countries have. Now, remember, he is a conservative. He's quite critical of China, to say the least. That's an understatement. But listen to what he had to say here. He said, last point, he wrote a multi-part tweet, and I won't read you the front part, but the last point that he made was about revising the international order is where Africa is especially important to China's ambitions. The continent is probably Beijing's most important supporter of its foreign policy goals, most notably at the UN. African countries shield China from human rights criticism, help it weather international criticism over issues like the Tiananmen Square massacre and its cover-up of the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, that's coming from Joshua Meservey. The point here is that Africa as a coalition is very, very important to China, politically speaking. And I don't get the sense that they either appreciate that political power that they have or leverage it to its maximum effect to further their own regional, continental, and national interests, to exact more concessions. This is where they've got leverage over China. They don't have leverage over China, economically speaking. All African countries can unite all they want. That doesn't matter. They're not going to have the economic power to make China agree to concessions. The same way that Southeast Asia, the Persian Gulf, Europe, and the United States have real economic leverage with China.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It then comes back to the need to take a much harder look, I think, at the relationships between different African countries, the kind of pecking orders, kind of between them, the issue of kind of pragmatically planning cross-border kind of initiatives that actually will support each other rather than being in direct competition with each other. And I think, like one of our guests that we frequently have, Anzetse Were, like a development economist in Nairobi, makes that point frequently, is you frequently see these countries competing against each other to sell the same thing to China rather than working pragmatically to try and kind of like boost, to raise everyone's boats by for example, refining in one place and then doing another phase of refining in another place, for example. So this kind of a kind of a pan-continental vision is really necessary, and it's such a cliche in Africa-China relations. It's been called for so many times that I think a lot more work needs to be done to look at, like, a very hard look at why it's seemingly impossible to actually achieve.
Do you need a lot of work to figure out why it's not been achieved? I mean, really? Is that a rhetorical question or a legitimate question?
No, a legitimate one. Like, kind of, I think we don't have real insights into the. I mean, we can imagine it, but we don't have clear kind of insights into, for example, the interactions between a country like Nigeria and its much smaller neighbors, for example.
No, I agree with you on that front, but there is really only one precedent for a regional bloc to work together, and that's Europe. And even Europe is so unwieldy and they are bickering with each other that it's not really a good model in many respects. I mean, it is a strong model, but it is dysfunctional, and these are, again, some of the highest governance countries in the world, and they struggle at it. But ASEAN has not done a very good job. Remember, we talked with some folks in South America who said that Mercosur and the South American, Latin American countries have done a very poor job on this. Human nature is such that working together is a very difficult thing that just doesn't have a lot of precedence. Europe is the best example of this, but I'm not sure that is how we are wired as creatures, to be that collaborative and to put aside all of our national interests, our petty grievances. I mean, you look at the tensions just this year in Africa, Morocco, Algeria, pulling ambassadors from one another, Ghana, Nigeria fighting with one another over any number of different issues on border, on trade, and then Kenya, Tanzania, I think it was, earlier. My point is that is typical of geopolitics, and putting all that aside to reach a common trade agreement with a power as large and potent as China, that just feels, I don't know, idealistic really idealistic.
Yeah, well, let's see. I agree. It's but at the same time, Africa had better kind of swing big, right? Kind of because it's not like things are going so great at the moment.
No, fair enough. I do. And again, I'm a big supporter and advocate of smaller regional blocks that are more manageable. So again, I think more potential in SADC in Southern Africa, the East Africa states, ECOWAS in West Africa, Horn of Africa. Horn of Africa right now obviously is not a happy place right now, but these regional blocks could be more manageable than at the African Union level, the pan-continental level, or the AFCFTA level. Just because, as we've seen with Europe, managing 28 countries is difficult. Africa's twice that amount, and it would be very, very difficult. And also the gap between the countries is enormous in terms of Botswana compared to Nigeria. And getting alignment on those countries with economies that are so divergent in size is a big, tall order. So listen, we're going to find out what happens next week. This is really going to be very interesting for us. We've been following Focac now for the past 6 weeks in detail. Leading up to Focac, we've been doing this thing called Focac Perspectives on the site and in our newsletter, where every day we're getting 3 different stakeholders to comment and to say what they want and what they're hoping will come out of Focac. It's an excellent series that we have on our website for subscribers. I highly recommend it. Together now, it looks so amazing to see all of these voices. We've got dozens of these voices and what they're asking for. So we've heard from people saying they want more transparency, they want debt issues to be addressed. Trade has been a big one. And so this is really going to be a fascinating Focac this year, coming amid the pandemic and this real junction in China-Africa relations. And I think we're going to see a very different tone coming out of this. Probably no more of the big infrastructure projects, a lot more targeted projects. Green is going to be a big topic. COVID and healthcare is going to be a big topic. Technology will be one, and these trade agreements. And I think we're going to see some progress on trade, which I think will be very exciting. We've raised a lot of the critical issues, but that's, again, what this exercise that we do here every week is for. So we'll leave the discussion there. If you would like to see the Focac perspectives and all the coverage that we've been doing for our subscribers, please go to ChinaAfricaProject/subscribe, and you can get a month free, and then you'll get the daily newsletter. We've got thousands of articles in the archive, all organized by country, keyword. You can search for it. It's really easy. And then if you'd like to support us over on Patreon, we got this amazing discussion going over on Patreon. It's so much fun, this great group of people that's over there. We're doing Zoom calls. We're going to do a Zoom call before Focac and one after Focac. Really excited about that. Also, if you join us on Patreon, you will get the Week in Review, the weekly digest that we publish every Friday. And Cobus and I last week published out our monthly extra bonus podcast as well. That's there. So lots of cool stuff over on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/ChinaAfricaProject and join our community there. If you don't want to necessarily get a subscription and get all the email, that might be too much. So we got lots of different things for different folks who just want to be engaged in this topic and really to join as much as we do. We love contributing to it every day and producing these shows, and we really appreciate your support. So that'll do it for this edition of the show. Cobus and I will be back again next week for another edition of the China in Africa podcast. Until then, for Cobus Van Staden, I'm Eric Olander. Thank you so much for listening.
The discussion continues online. Head over to facebook.com/ChinaAfricaProject to share your thoughts on today's show. For more information about the China Africa Project, go to ChinaAfricaProject.com.